There was a study published in Obesity, and it took a look at 173 people that drank less than a liter of water normally and had them slowly start adding more water into their diet. And they found that the more water they added into their diet, the more weight and fat they lost, even if they did not change their diet or increase exercise. So independent of diet changes and exercise, drinking more water led to more fat loss. Let's break this all down and look at a lot of different data so we can understand how we can use water to our advantage and talk about something that's age old and kind of known as just something healthy we should do, but nothing that we ever take to the bank as actually being cool. Like maybe being hydrated can actually make us literally look better. I popped a link down below for Thrive Market. That's a 30% off discount link. So after this video, you can get 30% off your entire grocery order through Thrive Market and a free $50 gift when you use that link. So what that link will take you to is an online grocery store where you can sort by different diet type, where you can sort by sugar-free, you can sort by paleo, whatever. All of it right there, and then it gets delivered to your doorstep. Super easy. Very good prices, especially when you compare like Whole Foods and some of these other places. But the best part is you're saving some money using that link and get that free $50 gift. So check them out after this video. It's on the top line of the description right underneath this video. So what's interesting is if you look at a study that was published in Nutrición Hospitalaria, this looked at subjects that replaced caloric beverages with water or did a pre-meal load with water. And they found simply by doing this, on average, there was a weight loss of 0.4 kilograms all the way up to 8.8 kilograms, with of course, most of the weight loss coming from the group that replaced caloric beverages with water. So you look at that and you're like, that doesn't surprise me that much. You're replacing a sugary caloric beverage with water. Of course, you're gonna lose weight. Yes, that one is interesting. But the people that just drank water before eating, they lost weight too, and they lost fat. Well, then you're thinking, well, it's simple. They just filled up their stomach and they didn't eat as much. Well, yes, that is true, and that's actually obvious and really cool, and we should probably do that more because it's so simple. But maybe there's more going on, and that's when we look at that study that I talked about already, published in Obesity. Took a look at people that barely consumed water and then said, hey, we want you guys to actually start drinking more water. And it's almost like magic. Once they started drinking more water, the weight fell off, the fat fell off, and they didn't even change their diet or increase exercise. Like it threw energy balance completely out the window. Everything we know about thermogenesis as we know it today, out the window, kaput. But increasing water intake, I just don't understand it. Well, what's probably happening here can be explained with some other research as far as resting energy expenditure goes. The Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism published a really interesting paper that shed so much light on how water might be increasing our metabolism, and not just a little bit. They had people consume 500 milliliters of water, or 50 milliliters of water, or 500 milliliters of osmotic saline. So basically water that would be easier to kind of assimilate in a way because it was like a saline form. What they found is that the water-only group was the only group that had an increase in their resting energy expenditure. They had a 25% increase in their metabolism for 60 minutes after consuming water. But this did not happen with 50 milliliters, and it did not happen with 500 milliliters of saline. I mean, at first we think this has got to be water-induced thermogenesis. It's something we've addressed before in science where we say, well, maybe it's a certain level of energy that's required to increase the temperature of cool water that we drink up to temperature, and that takes energy. So drink cold water because it's going to make you burn more calories. Well, unfortunately, this is kind of debunked because if that was the case, the 500 milliliters of osmotic saline solution would have increased metabolism, but it didn't. Only the water did. This leads us to believe that there's somewhat of a stimulation of osmosensitive structures. So basically, the osmolarity of the digestive system, of the portal vein, all this when we're absorbing water, that is actually increasing the energy demand at different organ levels. Essentially, if you have a decrease in osmolarity, you can decrease the thermogenesis. If you sort of increase the osmolarity, which basically meaning it's like a polar kind of contrast of sodium versus not sodium. It's kind of complicated there, but essentially at like various organ levels and tissue levels, we're potentially increasing thermogenesis. This is in-depth and wacky, but essentially what we have to take from this is drinking water can increase your metabolic rate. Now, how much does it? Well, if we look at the original study from Obesity that I looked at prior, basically consuming 500 milliliters of water will encourage you to burn about 23 calories. So it's not much, but over the course of a year, that adds up to about 17,000 calories, which is a little under 5 pounds, just by adding 500 milliliters of water. So we know that it has an effect there, but what about the appetite suppressant effect? Can it do something there? Seems like it can. The Journal of Natural Science published a paper, had subjects consume 500 milliliters of water 30 minutes prior to a meal 3 times per day. Okay, and they did this for 8 weeks, and ultimately what they found is, yep, they lost weight and they lost fat. Okay, so they probably didn't consume as much. So with that, we have to look at another paper that actually looked at total consumption of food in a similar situation. This one was published in Obesity, and it was interesting because they found that younger people did not have an effect on their appetite when they drank water. Whereas as people got older, it seemed to be dose dependent. Like as people got older, more water decreased their appetite more. But when they were younger, like in their 20s, it didn't seem to matter. So I guess the point is, as you get into your 30s and you start getting older, for whatever reason, maybe it's digestive related, who knows, water has an impact on your appetite. But if you're in your 20s, maybe your metabolism is fast enough that it doesn't really matter and you're just hungry anyway. Who knows? But let's talk insulin resistance for a second, because this is interesting. The American Journal of Clinical Nutrition did a paper where they had subjects that normally drink diet sodas. They had them either cut out diet soda or keep it in 5 times per week along with a meal. Okay, same amount of calories, and they found that the people that consumed water had decreases in fasting insulin, decreases in insulin resistance, improvements in insulin sensitivity, and overall just better glucose markers. Like, well, what was going on here? Could be a number of things. It could be the hydration aspect. It could be the fact that water is speculated on its own to increase insulin sensitivity. So maybe just insulin was doing its job better. I mean, I'm gonna go out on a limb and assume that water is probably better for you than diet soda, but I mean, it's still hydration, so who knows, right? Bottom line is hydration is important. Water is probably a little bit better when it comes down to insulin resistance, if not very important when it comes to insulin resistance. Now the interesting thing, what about direct lipolysis, the actual mobilization of fats? How does water impact us here? And after I go through this, I'm gonna give you a breakdown of how you can use water to your advantage a little bit more. The European Journal of Clinical Nutrition published a paper that demonstrated that when water was in the system, like we were hydrated, more hydrated, there was better glycerol turnover. Better glycerol turnover means that we're able to cleave free fatty acids off of the glycerol to be used as fuel. So we can burn the fat and we turn over the glycerol, whether it's gluconeogenesis or excreted or into a cell or whatever. That's interesting. So Frontiers in Nutrition said, well, let's try to figure this out. So they published a paper trying to nail sort of a mechanistic hypothesis. Basically what they found is that in a normally hydrated cell, ATP demand will trigger how much fat is liberated. So ATP demand is like, hey, we need energy. So that means that the cell will liberate fats in order to meet that demand. That is what happens in a perfectly normal hydrated sense. But when you're dehydrated, well, things change. When you're dehydrated, more triglycerides form, and it makes it harder for fatty acids to be turned into pyruvate. Pyruvate is essentially the part of the Krebs cycle that allows us to create energy. So in very simple terms, more storage form of fat compacts and builds, and it makes it harder to liberate the fats out of a cell to ultimately get turned into energy. This is problematic, because then you have an increase in glycerol transporters, aquamorin, which draws water and glycerol into a cell, which forms more triglycerides. So one could actually argue, and it's a stretch, but it's still an argument, that in a dehydrated state, it might be easier to store fat. So being dehydrated is definitely not good for fat loss and definitely not good for activity. And then lastly, before we get into the tips, there was a study that was published on aging in Lancet. And it found that there's a direct correlation between hydration and biological age. So essentially how old you look, your mitochondrial age, the more hydrated that you are, they looked at a lot of data, the younger your biological age. Biological age is like, hey, I'm 60 years old chronologically, but I have a biological age of 40 because I'm healthy. I'm actually 73 years old, and you guys didn't even know that. But I guess we gotta get to the nitty gritty. How do you use water to your advantage? Room temperature water, because it's easier to assimilate. So contrary to the whole cold water thing, increasing your metabolism, that's a load of garbage. That doesn't work. And if it is, it's minuscule. Okay, so normal room temperature water so you can assimilate it. Okay, regular straight water whenever possible. If you're exercising or you're fasting, then you could add electrolytes into the mix to improve that osmolarity so you actually absorb it faster when you're in need. 30 minutes prior to a meal, consume about 500 milliliters of water, or at least like 16 ounces. So drinking this 30 minutes before a meal, you might see a decent decrease in how much you choose to eat. As you get older, try increasing that water a little bit more. What I would say is 16 ounces if you're in your 30s, 20 ounces if you're in your 40s, 24 ounces if you're in your 50s, and keep it there. 24 ounces as you go. And that's a perfect number to kind of modulate your appetite. Now, what about to get the fat burning effect? The fat burning effect, I think personally, is going to come surrounding no food whatsoever. So drinking first thing in the morning. Wake up in the morning, the first thing that I do is have about a liter of water. I just pound about a liter of water. That's the first thing that I do. Because you're in a dehydrated state first thing in the morning. And that's making it so that you're improving that lipolysis, increasing that resting energy expenditure in the morning. And if you work out fasted and you're hydrated, there's an argument you might burn more fat. Because if you're fasted and you add water and you're hydrated, you are no longer impeding lipolysis from occurring via this hydration issue. Another time you're going to want to hydrate is going to be between lunch and dinner during that gap. Okay, 500 milliliters of water or so in like a nice profound sitting so that your body gets that resting energy expenditure effect. Sipping on water throughout the day is really good for adequate hydration, but I think you should have these boluses of water intake to get the thermic effect or to get that sort of osmolaric gradient effect. So sip on water to remain hydrated, but still have these spikes where you have peaks of hydration to get the thermic effect. As always, I'll see you tomorrow.